Hi, and welcome to Growth Hackers, the show where we talk about how you use digital to grow your business. I'm Godfrey, and today we're going to be talking about growth hacking in much more concrete terms than we have in the past. I've been asked to try and break it down into a number of specific steps that you can go through from beginning to end to grow your business. So the point behind growth hacking, to reiterate it, is that instead of allowing your business to grow passively just by doing the things that normal businesses do, you try to accelerate as fast as you possibly can, because growth hackers, who are typically small businesses or startups, understand that their existence depends on the rate at which they acquire customers. But that is true also of larger organizations. I mean, one of the truisms that we find today in the digital world is that technology grows at an exponential rate. That basically means technology grows like that. It's a curve which eventually tends towards straight up towards infinity. The difficulty is that organizations change at a logarithmic rate, which means they change at a rate that does that. They end up in a line which is horizontal. So there's a huge growing gap between technology and between the capabilities of organizations to deal with it. And that gap is a fantastic opportunity for small businesses to jump in and to innovate ahead of the curve. So big companies are trying hard to emulate that, and they're finding it really difficult to do because their culture actually denies them the opportunity to do it. The only way to succeed and the only way to really stay ahead of that curve is to be strategic about the way you approach your business and its planning and its evolution. You don't allow the business model that you defined 5 years ago to dictate your future. You keep on refreshing it, you keep on looking at where the market is going, you look at where the technology is going, and you decide how you are actively going to change your business so that it meets the emerging needs of your customer base. Ideally, if you're really hot, you change the needs of your customer base ahead of them, so that you're always ahead of it and you're always creating the chaos for your competitors. So there is an 8-step process that you can go through, and we've talked about this once before on a previous episode. The first one is to define your mission. Why are we doing this? What's in it for our business? What is in it for our customer? The next step is to define, what does the outcome look like? How do we define success? What is the vision? The third one is you look at where you are now, and you look at that you take the gloves off and you take a hard look at where you are in terms of your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, and you compare where you are now with what the vision is for where you want to be a year to 18 months down the line. And there will always be gaps. So you then go in, you prioritize those gaps, and you decide which ones are going to give you the optimal bang for the investment that you put into it. Once you've prioritized it, you can then start setting meaningful objectives, which allow you to tackle each one of those bridges and start moving towards where you want to go. And you know, because you've set objectives, what it is you're trying to achieve. You can then look at the obstacles in your way and define strategies to either overcome those obstacles or to bypass those obstacles. And once you've done that strategic thinking, which is really a broad brush approach to how are we actually going to make it from where we are to what success looks like a year down the line, you can then and only then start thinking about the specifics of the plan. What are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? What are you going to spend on it? How are you going to keep track of it? And so on. Don't start the other way around, because you'll always go in the wrong direction. That general process is a process you can apply to absolutely anything, but it's particularly useful when you're trying to apply it to managing an organization into a changed situation. It doesn't help to work harder. When change is going at that rate, you can never keep up with it. You can't ever change. You can't ever keep up. You're always, it's kind of like stepping onto the back end of a train that's already moving and trying to walk your way up to the engine, but the train is doubling in size every couple of minutes. You will always be on the back foot. So you need to be much more strategic in the way you approach it. You need to think in terms of hours and days rather than in terms of weeks and months. And you need to be constantly testing for the future, testing what people are going to be wanting, and making sure that your business is able to actually respond to that. You know, there are a lot of things you can test for, and there are a lot of things you can work on. So you need to look at that entire circle of how do we activate interest in the business? How do we make people aware of us? How do we make them purchase us? How do we make them use our product enthusiastically? And how do we make them refer it to their friends, who in turn then become aware of us, purchase the product, use the product, and refer it to their friends. So there is an upward cycle that you need to drive because you can't afford to let it happen passively. And social media has stepped into that gap for a lot of companies. They thought that social media is a great solution to that. As it happens, it hasn't turned out to be such a great solution, but it's been a pretty good contributor in some instances. I'll give you an example. We've all heard of Airbnb. Airbnb started out with a couple of guys in San Francisco who had a spare room and needed some cash. And they decided to put an air mattress in the room and try and rent it out. And it was kind of an unsuccessful process, and they eventually got somebody in. And then they thought, well, what if we got everybody who's got a spare room to do something similar, and we gave them an opportunity to make some cash by allowing a traveler to stay with them instead of having to spend the money of going into a hotel. It seems like a brilliant idea in retrospect, but at the time it was kind of a goofy idea, and it didn't work. They spent a lot of time doing the wrong things. They hadn't perfected the art of growth hacking. So they started marketing their product to everybody who travels, which is a hugely expensive and wasteful thing to do. They ran out of money on a number of occasions. They ended up selling packets of breakfast cereal to try and raise their first $30,000. They got one investor who was sort of interested and gave them a little bit of cash. And they grew their holdings. They got more and more people to book online. They got more and more people to put their rooms online. But they weren't getting the traction. They weren't getting the booking rate. People would come, they would look, and they wouldn't book. And then they'd be going, well, what have we done? We've wasted an opportunity. So they realized that the photography was a bad thing because they were allowing people to photograph their own rooms, and it was pretty shabbily done. So they invested their time in personally going around and photographing all of the rooms in the area. And they realized that that would double the booking rate on their website. So things started to look up a little bit. They were turned down by venture capitalists because they didn't really have a lot of traction. It wasn't really going that well. And then one day, the drummer from a well-known music band booked out an entire house, and they thought, wow, we're on our way, because he started to tell his friends. And the next thing is they started getting celebrities using their service. And along came Ashton Kutcher, and Ashton Kutcher said, this is a great deal, I'm going to invest some money in it. And because he'd invested in it, everybody else wanted to invest in it. And literally, they became a $10 billion valuation business. But it took them nearly 7 years to achieve that. It wasn't an overnight success. Growth hacking tries to get to that point in months rather than in years. And there are 8 phases that you go through in growth hacking. And I'm going to give them to you now, and then I'm going to elaborate on a couple of them. The first one really is you've got to create a product that people want. That seems obvious, but it isn't obvious to a lot of people who start businesses. A lot of people who will start a business, particularly technical people, will go, I think this is fantastic, it's a great idea, I love it, therefore everybody else will love it. And then they wonder why it doesn't sell. So you've got to do the job of marketing and understand exactly what your target market is looking for, where the gaps are in the market. Number 2, target only a small niche market. Don't go after the whole world. Don't do what Airbnb did. Go after the people that are most likely to see value in what it is that you're doing, because that way you're not wasting money advertising to or trying to reach people who are not going to be interested. Number 3, pick a growth model that is appropriate to your market and to your product. For a lot of growth, there are really 3 models that you can work with. The first one is a viral model. The second one is a sticky model. And the third one is a paid model. Viral growth is really all about having a product which allows or encourages its users to promote it to their friends or to their colleagues. Okay. A classic example of a viral product would be something in the software space, for example. Dropbox is a case in point. If you've got a Dropbox account, you will earn more storage space if you actually bring in new friends who will then sign up for their own Dropbox account. So Dropbox grew entirely on personal referral. And getting that referral is easy if you're in a software or a digital business, because you can do lots of things in that space. It's less easy to do if you're selling cars or if you're selling houses. The sticky model is a model which says, all right, Acquisition we will deal with, but once we've got customers, we need to keep them, because keeping customers is really, really important. An existing customer will do more business with us over time. So let's make sure we have a sticky product. And I guess the classic example of a sticky product is Facebook. People love using it. Once they're using it, they're hooked on it. They stick with it over and over again. And at the same time, it's a viral product because it hooks their friends in, because their friends want to see what's going on. And the third one is a paid model. And a paid model is really where you say to yourself, what does it cost me to acquire a customer? And what is the lifetime value of that customer? So if it's going to cost me $100 to acquire a customer, but I'm going to make $10,000 off that customer over the next 5 years, then it's worthwhile making that upfront investment. For a lot of startups, that's hard to do because they don't have the cash to invest in the first place. But it's a model that most big companies and big brands tend to use these days. Is it's easier and easier to manage to go out and advertise and find new customers than it is to go back and re-engineer your products and your processes so they're either sticky or they're viral. The fourth step really is to activate the customers. Give them a really happy first experience. So once somebody has actually acquired your product, whether it's they've visited your restaurant, they've purchased an item of clothing from you, they bought a car from you, they're doing insurance through you, you've got to activate them. You've got to make sure that they're really happy that they did it, because if they're not really happy that they did it, they will either go somewhere else, or they won't tell their friends to come to you. So activation is a really critical component of that. Then, once you've activated them, you need to retain them. You've got to keep them in the system. A retained customer is worth far more to you than a new customer. They will spend more money far more readily than somebody who is new. Then the sixth step is you should never stop trying to front load your cash. That means you've got to manage your cash flows really, really tightly. You don't want customers who are going to cost you money and then pay you. Ideally, you want customers who will give you money and then cost you. And we've seen huge successes in the subscription model, for example. You can subscribe to receive a box of cosmetics and makeup every month. That is a huge deal because it's a clustered box, but you're paying for it up front and you're only getting it 30 days later. So wherever you can, you need to make sure that you manage your cash so that you don't end up with a big gap between what you're spending and what you're bringing in. The seventh step is to use metrics. Growth hackers are obsessed by analytics. You don't know whether you're succeeding unless you can measure it, and you can't measure it if you don't have a goal. So you've got to look at the metrics that really, really matter to you. And they will vary from product to product and market to market, but there's a couple that really matter. One of them is a referral metric. In other words, it's called actually the K factor. And it's of those customers who refer you to their friends, what percentage of the friends actually become customers? And managing that becomes really important if you're a viral product. The other one is what's called a net promoter score. A net promoter score is the difference between the number of people who would endorse you to their friends and the number of people who would not endorse you to their friends. And that score should trend higher and higher over time. And if you get those right, you're starting to get things right. But there's a ton of other metrics in there that you might want to look at. And step 8 really is constantly improving your product as you go forward. It's about iterating. It's about not being complacent. It's about being aware that the market is evolving, the technology is evolving, and as the technology evolves, the behaviors of your target market change, and you need to make sure that your product or your service keeps pace with those changes, or else it'll start to become less and less relevant in people's lives, and you'll start to lose your customers. So let's go back over those things one at a time. Number one, create a product that people actually want. In classical marketing, that's what you do. You go out, you look at the needs of your market, you do the surveys, you try to understand what people are doing, you look at their lifestyles, you look at their behaviors, and you elegantly sculpt a product that fits into a gap that is already there. In growth hacking, you don't necessarily have the money to do that because research is expensive and it's slow. So you need to use the tools that are available to you, and the tool that is most readily available to most people these days is social media. So you can use Facebook, you can use Instagram, you can use LinkedIn, depending on what the nature of your business is, as a massive focus group where you can ask questions, you can get responses from people, you can try things out. One of the classic ways of validating whether your product idea works And you don't see big brands doing this because it's somehow considered to be a little bit dodgy, and perhaps it is. But small startups do this all the time. And that is that you launch a product that you don't have. You literally create a brand or a product. You give it 1 or 2 pages on a website or just a landing page, and you advertise it. Or you talk about it in social media, and you'll see what the response is, you'll see what the uptake is, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the traction would be if you actually launched the product. And in the process of doing that, you capture the interest of people who potentially will become customers of that product if you manage to grab their addresses by getting them to fill in a registration form. What you have to do is try to validate the product concept as fast as you possibly can across as good a sample of your target market as you possibly can. Part of that is understanding who your target market actually is. Again, a lot of us tend to do what in marketing and market research is called become guilty of the self-reference concept. The self-reference concept is all about, I think it's good, therefore everybody else will like it. And you've got to get out of your own head and get into the head of your customers and make sure you think through the eyes of your target customers. And you might well find that your target customer market is different from you and is different from the market that you thought it was. You also need to think about differentiating. And differentiating is all about how do you stand out from all the other guys in the marketplace in a way which is positive and not ridiculously overpriced for you as a producer. So you try to create differentiation without it costing you money. And we could spend an hour talking about that, but there are classic examples. Apple does it very, very well. Get feedback fast, validate as fast as you possibly can. Second step, target early adopters. So when I said earlier on target a niche, think about who will be the first people who will want to try your product and only talk to them. So if you're launching a restaurant, for example, that is targeting vegans, only talk to them. And only talk to those who are most vocal. Those are the people that run blogs, they tweet a lot about vegetarianism. Target them, get them to come in and talk about it. Because if they like it, because they're early adopters, people will trust it more and they will follow the trend that has been established by them. Remember that the money is in the customer list, all right? If you're trying to grow your business, you're trying to grow your customer base. Don't ever take your customers for granted. If you have an opportunity to grab the details of a customer, their name, their telephone number, their email address, at the very least, perhaps a social media contact, do so, because that list is gold. That's a list that you go back and you mine if you need any help, you need any feedback, or if you actually need to try and pitch a sale at people. You can increase revenue much faster once you've already got people to talk to. So there's a phenomenon in growth hacking called pirate metrics. It's a concept that was first put out by a guy called Dave McClure, who is the founder of 500 Startups. And he said that there are only 5 things that you really need to measure if you want to growth hack properly. And he called them pirate metrics because the abbreviation comes out to R. It's AARRR. Acquisition, activation, so acquiring your customers, activating your customers, retaining your customers, so that's your R. Your second R is revenue, making sure that the cash comes through, making sure that your revenue continues to grow positively. And the last one is referral, making sure that people actually talk to their friends and recommend the product. So those pirate metrics become kind of important. First one is acquisition. 3 routes to growth I talked about: viral, sticky, and paid. Pick the one that works for you. It's almost impossible to do more than one at a time. And the nature of your product will determine how that actually works. Small companies tend to focus on doing something, and if it doesn't work, they do something else as well. Don't do that. Okay? If you want to growth hack your business, and you try something, and the feedback is not good, you don't get the validation you want, it's not getting traction, stop doing it. You do what is called a pivot. A pivot is a term in startup companies which basically describes deciding to move in a different direction. So move in a direction which seems to be more aligned with the interests of your target market. Don't get sentimental about a product that you were in love with to begin with that nobody else actually likes. Pivot in the direction where the business lies in, and you will find that you waste a lot less time and a lot less money, and you move ahead a great deal faster. Viralness is not that easy to pull off in physical products, but I'll give you an example of a company that managed to do it quite well, and that is Apple. When Apple launched the iPod was not the first music player. There were lots of music players out, and a lot of them were smaller and lighter and more easy to use than the Apple iPod. But what Apple did was it gave people white earbuds. Previously, they were always black or gray. But because Apple handed out white earbuds, their product, or the user of their product, stood out in a crowd. And suddenly it became a differentiator that basically said more than just this is an Apple product. It basically said, I'm an elitist, I've got something which you don't have, and I can broadcast that without ever having to say that. It's not in your face, but it's very much in your face. And it worked really well for them because it differentiated the users of their product in the public street. So that went viral because there was a visual viralness attached to it. Remember that viralness is a factor of social media broadcasting. So social media is not about broadcasting a message, it's about communicating. It's about one person talking to another and that person talking back or talking to somebody else. Mathematical formula for a network is 2 to the power n if n is the number of people in the network. So an audience of 8 is worth 8, a network of 8 is worth 256. And the more people you add to that network, the more exponentially it grows. An audience of 100 is worth 100, a network of 100 is worth 2 to the power 100, which is 2 times 2 times 2, 100 times. And that gives you a number that is followed by something like 35 zeros. Where would you rather be from a viral perspective? Having people talking about you, creating buzz about you, or just spending money to broadcast an advertisement at them? There's absolutely no question that the ROI lies in networked communication rather than broadcast communication. And most growth hackers really understand that and try to leverage it. Okay, so the next step is activation. Okay, the other A, activation. How do you get people to actually have a happy first exposure to your product? Lots of different ways of doing that. Obviously, you need to have a good product and you need to have a good customer experience. But from a communication point of view, focus on video rather than focusing on text. Video is the new text. It's becoming easier and easier to produce. We know that by 2020, which is not that far away, half of all the searches on the internet are going to be by voice. And what people are searching for is video. So make sure you've got video which explains things to potential customers far more clearly than text. But it also has a benefit to you in terms of search engine ranking. So if people are searching for, say, a Chinese restaurant in Cape Town, the chances of getting your restaurant onto the number 1 page of the search results increase 53 times if you've got video on your page. Why? Because Google knows people are looking for pages with video on them. So exercise video and make sure that it actually is something that you can work with. Number 5 is maximizing retention. We've talked about that. Make sure people are happy. Make sure you acknowledge them. Realize that sometimes it'll take 5 to 7 contact points with a prospective customer before they become a real customer. So don't lose track of them. Have the ability to go back to them over and over again and be patient with that. Number 6, maximizing your revenue. I've talked about front loading your cash as far as you possibly can. Don't be too generous. Small startups like to be generous. They give away lots of stuff. Don't do that. Cash is really in short supply if you're a small business. Rather improve the value than reduce the price. Okay, and you can do that by bundling, you can do that by clustering, you can do that by doing specials, you can do that by doing advanced payment deals, you can do all sorts of things, but don't just cut your price because that is a race to the bottom and you can't afford to do that if you're a small business. Referrals. Okay, maximize your referrals. It's one thing to have a Facebook page, but really try to get people to give referrals. Ask for them wherever you possibly can. And if you're face-to-face with your customers, ask for them on video. So just shoot them with your phone, because you can then composite those into very short, sharp ads at a later stage that make you look real, make you look authentic, and make you look like you're worth talking to. And that, I think, is probably the maximum time we've got right now. We've covered some major steps in that process. And next time we're going to be talking about growth hacking in a number of specific fields, particularly, number one that I'm really interested in, is education. So until next time, I hope you found this useful. Talk to us on our website, and we'll see you at the next episode.